further ado, I'd like to open the public hearing on R-23-142, establishing a capital reserve fund for the purpose of funding major repairs, replacement furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and making capital improvements to the Nashua Center for the Arts. Is there anybody here to present anything on that? No? Director Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. I believe the sponsor, Trish Klee, would like to say a few words, and I'm happy to speak after her if you'd like.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was
Alderman
over
Klee.
here. I didn't want to interrupt you. Yes, the Board of Trustees have requested this fund so that funds that come in from the I want to call it the revenue.
Spectacle?
Right, the revenue from the Nashua Center for the Arts, that we have a place to put that money and so on, because that was what the original plan was, that the proceeds that came to the city from that would go into this fund that would fund the capital account. So that is the basic gist of it. We need it to be a non-lapsing, that's why it needs to be a expendable trust fund, so that it doesn't lapse and it continues to go on. I think they also, if there were any kinds, not that we would expect it, but I think if there were any kind of donations or anything like that, that too could go into this.
Okay. Does anybody have any further questions? Yes, Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to Alderman Klee. Would this money follow the same, basically, requirements of the Finance Committee? In other words, that the Performing Arts Center can spend up until $10,000 in dollars amount north of that?
That, Alderman O'Brien, I'm going to have to look to Mr. Griffin or Director Cummings.
Yeah,
Either
I
one of
believe
those.
the spending authority is Mr. Griffin.
Yes, that's who it is at this point, but I don't know what the dollar amount is.
Yes, John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector. The threshold amount is $25,000 on a single item for the Finance Committee. Just a little clarity on the mechanics. The revenue will come in from the trustees of the Nashua Center for the Arts. It will be put in a general fund revenue. And then on an annual basis, similar to what we do for what we used to do for the Downtown Improvement Committee, will move it into this fund. You will appropriate the dollars into this fund. And it will accumulate non-lapsing. And there'll be a mechanism to fund future capital needs whenever they appear. Director Cummings can help me out, but I think Spectacle Management is on the hook for any expenditures under $1,500. And furthermore, the contract between the city and Spectacle lays out the percentages of concessions, the dollar per ticket, and other items that will come in as revenue. Not sure if they're gonna come in once a year or quarterly or whatever, and then you folks will appropriate the monies the next succeeding budget. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman?
Yes.
I can answer that question. It is going to come in on a quarterly basis. At the last Board of Trustees meeting, they did determine exactly when it would be coming in and so on. And they will be reporting it as such on a quarterly basis.
Very
And I
good, thank you.
believe it's the first month after the end of the quarter is when it will be reported and when it will come into the city. We were very clear that we wanted to make sure that we could hang our hat onto the time frame that it would be coming in. So, and they have monies that are kind of sitting there now waiting for this fund to be available. And I believe you have set up an account, is that correct, for this money to come into once this fund
We
is?
will be setting, good question, thank you. We will be setting up a general fund revenue account. On a calendar basis, we'll calculate what those numbers are, and then we'll put it in the next budget resolution and the succeeding budget resolutions to move the money into a position where I, or my position, is the agent to expend to get the monies over to the Nashua Center for the Arts, should it be necessary. Thank you.
All set? Any
Thank you.
questions for Treasurer or Director Cummings? Yes, Alderman Sullivan?
I'm gonna save a majority of my questions for the budget meeting that's gonna happen right after this. But I just want to clarify, and maybe you misspoke, but it's a capital reserve fund. It isn't an expendable trust fund. And my understanding, thanks to Mr. Griffin, those are different. Those are different types of funds, correct?
John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector, that is correct. Alderman Sullivan, a capital reserve fund contemplates future capital expenditures, or an expendable trust fund is for purposes that, such as city retirement, you'll vote on something tonight, snow removal, trust fund, other things that aren't capital but are needed from time to time. Thank you.
All set? Any other questions?
I appreciate it.
All right, we'll go right into the public hearing. On R 23-142, are there any testimony in favor? Name and address for the record.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. Couple things. This is gonna be money coming in from Spectacle based on sales of items and another thing. Did we determine a contract or make an arrangement on getting $1 off of ticket sales, which is one of the items that's part of this? What is the deal for getting that arrangement done? Does anyone know? Because that's a big one. That's where you're gonna get some money. And that was, I believe, presented when Director Cummings presented it to us, that was something that could happen. But as I read through this, I'll find the part that will tell you that it's something that has to be negotiated. And I'm wondering if it has been negotiated. It probably has not yet been negotiated. Okay. This agreement, the Spectacle agreement that I'm looking at, has a term of 7 years from the occupancy date. Do you know why we expire it after 7 years? Will this fund disappear after 7 years? What's the purpose of having this term with Spectacle? Do we intend on no longer having Spectacle manage it after 7 years? Why did we pick 7 years?
I don't think there's anyone here that can answer that question other than maybe Director Cummings, but it's not part of this legislation.
Well, it is because the expendable trust fund is set up under this Spectacle contract. So I'm looking at the fact that this contract expires in 7 years, and I'm wondering why.
Unless somebody on the board knows. Alderman Cleen?
I do not know why the 7 years were chosen, but I think the intent has always been that the city would never run this. So whether it's Spectacle or it's ABC management or something, that I think Director Cummings probably can answer it better. I think the intent has always been to have someone else run this, not the city. I think that was almost kind of promised to the people, that the city is not in the business of necessarily running this. So whether it be Spectacle or ABC management or whoever it to be, I believe that's what it is. Why 7 years? I believe they negotiated that 7 years per what Spectacle wanted and so on. I don't think any of the residents in the city of Nashua would have been really thrilled if we did this in perpetuity. So I think we had to have and 7 years is a really good time frame for them to get started, understand. And I believe that there is if I'm not mistaken, there's somewhere in the contract that kind of gives them the ability to to continue with this and so on. But I
Director
think
Cummings
it's
has
just
volunteered to come up and answer it.
Yeah, I think that's just a part of the negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. The 7-year question is one relative to actually falling into compliance with the new market tax credit. So the 7 years goes with the new market tax record compliance period. Honestly, I wanted it to be a shorter period of time. I want something like 3 or 5 years. We're creating a new market, and so we essentially wanted to make sure we knew what the market was doing. We wanted to see it stabilize. Spectacle would obviously like a longer contract. They wanted something, more than 7 years. We ultimately agreed to have 7 years. I thought that that would be a reasonable amount of time to have enough data, and then we could reassess and renegotiate the contract with Spectacle or any other operator or management group that we may entertain at that point in time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I thought it might be New Markets tax credit related. Another part of this, let's see. I just want to get to my part that I looked at. Have we had expenditures above the $1,500 that have required us to draw on the money that has been raised so far? Do you know?
I don't believe that has anything to do with this particular resolution. We're just establishing a capital reserve fund with no funding being talked about at this meeting. It's coming from Spectacle in accordance with the contract, but anything beyond that is not specifically related to this resolution.
Okay, I want to know, there's another part in here that I think is relative, and that is, Spectacle shall make its books, records, and files relating to the facility available for inspection and copying by the city upon written request within 5 business days of the request, and maintain the records in the term of the agreement plus 3 years. How are those, this would be records that you could obtain relative to this contract or this money going in there. Who is the city to make that request? When it says the city can make the request, who is that?
I would believe
Is that,
Board of
it's not
Directors.
really a citizen, is it?
I would assume it's the Board of Directors, but.
Board of Trustees.
Board.
It's the Board of Trustees?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. The contract says that. I'm going to assume that it's a Board of Trustees. You were at the last meeting. They report to us everything that they have, that is costed, as well as the funds that have been received. So,
Oh, okay, so I would like an answer to that, just to be certain what that is under 91A. And I did attend the trustees meeting, and I was happy to do so, but I was disappointed there was no public comment allowed. Okay, the Advanced Reserve Fund. Let's see. This is where there's the ticket thing in here, and merchandising. One quick question, just so I understand this. The contract that we have for the operating manual, which gives us all the pieces of the utilities, I noticed that's not done yet. And that kind of feeds into this fund. Do we know when the operating manual is going to be completed? It was supposed to be completed 3 months before the opening. It's now 5 months past, so we're 8 months out. And I'm just wondering where we stand on that operating manual.
Alderman Clee?
again, it's not part of what this resolution is, but I'll do my best to answer it. We have discussed this at the Board of Trustees, and it was even discussed, I believe, at the last Board of Trustees, that the outline of it will be coming. They ran into some issues with just as we were doing the opening, including finishing things that night before. So they were kind of given we know that it's coming and we will get it done. They are working on the manual so that the reason for the operation manual is if someone isn't there or doesn't have to, they can just pick up this manual and continue to make sure that everything is running. It was discussed at the Board of Trustees meeting that you were at. So it's not something that's being ignored. And while, yes, we did even discuss the fact that it was supposed to be done prior to that, there were circumstances beyond their control, so.
Okay, and the utilities that the city is paying, those will not be paid out of this fund, correct? That's a whole separate area? Okay. I'm just trying to find the spot on the ticket, because I had a question about that. I know I highlighted it, but maybe not. They did provide in the meeting a first quarter report, and honestly, it was good. Concession sales raised 5,000. Sponsorship sales raised almost 5,000. So for the quarter, they raised about 10 grand. And it doesn't include any ticket money. So if that comes in, that would be great. I would love to see where it said the ticket thing.
The first thing we have to do by this resolution is give it a place to
Put the money.
put it.
Okay, I can't find my little spot that I had it in here, but I know I read it. That's okay. I mean, I would like to get an answer, though, to find out what we're doing with, coming up with an arrangement where we do collect $1 on a ticket sales, because that would make a big difference, I think, in this fund. You know, if there are even some, whatever they want to negotiate, but if we could get something out of some of those events, it would be a lot of money, I think, to help. Thank you.
Alderman,
Yes, Director Cummings?
yes, thank you.
Again, good evening. Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. So there are a few anticipated revenue sources that would be used to capitalize this fund. 10% of Spectacle's gross food and beverage revenues, 10% of the gross sponsorship revenues by Spectacle, 50% of Spectacle's net and NPAC branded merchandise revenues, and then we have $1 per ticket sale as deemed appropriate by NPAC or Spectacle that would be set aside. All those would be capped at $25,000. So on the upside, you'd be looking at approximately $100,000 that could get transferred into this fund in a calendar year. That was, again, the model or the anticipated thought process that we wanted to start off with. And one of the reasons why I didn't want the contract to go too long is because I think it's something, as you get a better understanding of the data and what the market is generating, you probably want to revisit this. But we didn't have anything other than precedent from other communities to use when we were developing the operator agreement. And this was a negotiated contract that we all settled upon these numbers. So that's how we arrived at the various revenue streams for this particular what I would consider a deferred capital maintenance plan. So early on, I actually had someone say to me, never build something unless you have a way to pay for it and maintain it. And that's essentially what this tool does. This is just an asset management plan. The thought process is we just spent a bunch of money to be able to build the building. I'm hoping we'll get quite a few years between warranties and good workmanship, so we won't necessarily have to spend down on this. And so we'll be able to see this money accrue over a few years, but then it would be there as a kitty. So if necessary, you would have it available to you, and you wouldn't have to spend monies out of the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cummings. Anyone else that wishes to speak in favor of R 23-142? Treasurer.
John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector. For the group here, just one note. The city is on the hook of providing the connections for the utilities. But as part of Spectacle's agreement, they pay for the electricity, the gas, the water. And they accept that. So that is duly noted in the contract agreement. I just wanted to make sure you folks knew that. Thank you.
All right. Yes, Alderman
Clee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to echo, and I was going to make that point, at the Board of Trustees meeting, Spectacle actually even mentioned about how the utility bill was extraordinarily expensive, and that was because of the air conditioning unit. The air conditioning unit, the proper operation of it had not been turned over to them. They actually, it's so sophisticated, they had to be trained on it. And I believe they just had that training completed just about a week ago. So they've had to keep it going all the time. It wasn't something they could shut off and turn on. And they've been on the hook for quite an expensive utility bill. And they
Again,
even
we're
commented.
getting off track.
Right, they even commented on that they're hoping that this is going to lessen their burden, and they really have taken on that expense. It was talked about at the last Board of Trustees. And just to kind of add to that operation manual, that was one of the issues also recently why they couldn't do it, because that is going to be part of how to operate that, the air conditioning unit. They're not going to put any secret codes in it. They mentioned that,
We have to
but yeah.
continue with the public hearing, so.
Yes.
If there's no one else in favor, any testimony in opposition? Seeing none, we'll move once again to testimony in favor. Seeing none, again, testimony in opposition. Seeing none, I'll now close the public hearing on R 23-142 at 7:30 PM. I'll now like to open the public hearing on R 23-149 at 7:30 PM. And R 23-149 is amending the scope of the Park Rehabilitation Expendable Trust Fund and transferring funds into the Park Rehabilitation Expendable Trust Fund from the East Side Recreational Facilities Expendable Trust Fund for the purpose of making infrastructure repairs to the Sargent Avenue Park area. Is there anyone that's going to testify? Give us an overview, one of the sponsors, or several of the sponsors? Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I'm just going to give a very brief overview. And we do have a letter from Alderman Camo, who was actually the first person on the scene for this particular thing. And I believe myself and Alderman Karen have joined in on it. And I did speak to Mr. Griffin as a little bit about the funding of this particular thing. The reason for this is that the original trust fund, I believe, that was created only allowed for 11, if I'm not mistaken, 11 of the parks. And at that time, those were the parks that were in the most need. And Alderman Karen probably has more information on that than I did. Since then, the monies that have kind of been sitting there and so on have not been used for this particular thing. And we have needs in other parks, including the Sargent Ave park, the lighting and so on. But that's the 10,000 feet kind of overview on it. And if Alderman Karen would like to add to that, I would appreciate
Karen,
it.
do you want to add?
Absolutely. Yes, they picked these 11 parks and playgrounds because they were in worse shape. So in order for us to get the work done, they set up this trust fund. And once the work was done, we had money left over. And as Alderman Sullivan talks about these funds, why aren't we using them, you know? So in order to be able to use this for Sargent Ave or someplace else, we had to change this. And I think this is a good idea, because I keep saying we don't take care of our facilities. So if we have this kind of money sitting around, not that you want to throw it away on whatever, but look at St. Andrew's Playground. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we talked about doing it, but we never had the money. So this is the way to do this and to get this done, and that's why I agreed when Alderman Como asked if I would co-sponsor it with him and Alderman Clee. So I think this is a great idea, and it will be used for its purpose. So I think that's important.
Okay. Any questions for the two sponsors? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Testimony.
Mr. Chairman, before you do that, several references have been made to Alderman Como's letter. And then looking at the agenda, I don't know if it's been accepted. So I would like to make a
Will be
motion.
accepted at the budget meeting.
It will be accepted at the budget meeting, then I'll yield to that. Thank you.
Okay. R 23-149, testimony in favor. Seeing none. Testimony in opposition. Seeing none. Once again, testimony in favor. Seeing none. And once again, testimony in opposition. Seeing none. I'd like to close the public hearing on R 23-149 at 7:35 PM. Alderman O'Brien?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn by roll call.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien votes yea. Alderman Sullivan?
Yes.
Alderman Clay?
Yes.
Alderman Moran?
Yes.
Alderman Lopez?
No.
Alderman Clemmons?
Yes.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Yes.
Alderman Como?
He's not here.
Alderman Dowd?
Yes.
Alderman Gaveva?
Yes.
Alderman Karen?
Yes.
Alderman Theobald?
Yeah.
And that does it, Mr. Chairman. I have 11 yeas, 0 nay, 1 nay. Excuse me, 10 yeas, 1 nay.
Okay, motion carries. Meeting is declared adjourned at 7:36 PM. We'll take 5 minutes and start the budget here.